an ambitious, concise, and action-oriented pact. So the question is, of course, how do you obtain an ambitious level? Knowing that some issues, and we know it from the negotiations last year, knowing that some issues are highly disputed. We have a kind of chosen a way where we try to pick up things we thought have to be in the agenda and then fought through by the member states. I mean, maybe we don't want to push the ball back or kind of kick the ball back, but it's clear that in some issues you have to direct us in the kind of, it's not enough to depict in the input your own position. We have to now find out also in the exchange between the delegations what will be the landing zone. So in some instances we were kind of not so concrete as we could have been. But I invite everybody to look at the negotiations, not as, this is not a zero draft that is set in stone. We always said it. We always said that there will be other processes feeding in our process. So we have certain steps, like in April, the spring meetings, or the financing for development, or other decisions that automatically I think we will have to factor in. But we wanted to provide a language that has kind of is standing for on its own behalf through all these negotiations, because one of disaster factor would of course be to put into question everything all the time when there is a process in it. But at the same time, I demand flexibility of it's really demanded by the logic of the process, not I personally, that we are flexible enough to put in things we achieve in our deliberations in other processes meanwhile. So maybe for some it's not as ambitious as it could be, yes. In other instances it's too ambitious, so let's kind of go on this journey together and make it the most ambitious possible after we have negotiated on the issues. Lastly, we kept the text as concise as was possible, and I said all this, some issues we had to do in a broader way and as an anchor point, because the full breadth of issues covered by the pact is too complex, because it's an all-in process as compared to other processes we have been dealing with here in the GA. Before we move on to each chapter in more detail, one practical note. You will see that there are subheadings in square brackets throughout the text. These headings are not part of the text, but are included to ensure readability of the document. So we will not negotiate on it, and also it will drop out when we go in the last phase of negotiations. I would like to give I would like now come to a walkthrough to the chapeau. As soon as Neville Gertz is here, he will take over. So sorry for hearing only my voice. We had foreseen some kind of chapter-wise alteration in the moderation, but now I start with the first part. The chapeau, if you look at the chapeau, it is intended to speak to a wider audience. Also, if you look at the language, including the broader public, as far as they really have the courage to read such a text. This is in line with delegations' request for the chapeau to define a shared people-centered vision for the future. In that vein, we intended that the chapeau could also be read as a standalone product. So the logic is very much not only drawing from kind of language we know, but also try to have a language that is less UN speak. This will lead obviously to also questions. What is the definition? What do you mean by that? But we are totally open to discuss it, of course, in the deliberations on the chapeau. The chapeau tried to set out a high-level vision for multilateralism, and it made the case that in the face of global challenges and emergent risks and opportunities, we need strong cooperation guided by trust, by equity, by solidarity and universality, and a reinvigorated multilateral system. With the UN at its center, it also stresses the urgency to act now. So we thought that mirrors the vision conveyed by many of you in your submissions. And also the overwhelming majority of you noted that the importance of strong international cooperation in light of mounting challenges is key, and the key message also of the Pact for the Future. We have jointly laid out in the modalities resolution the Summit of the Future should provide multilateral solutions for a better tomorrow. And of course, lastly, and based on several of your submissions, the Chapeau also proposes a review of the implementation of the Pact by member states by the end of the 80th General Assembly session to ensure that we have follow-up on the commitments we make. The follow-up can be discussed, when and in what rhythm, but I think that was a demand by many of you, and I'm looking really forward to the discussion about that, because the follow-up question also arises, of course, for things we are pointing on other summits that will take place in the course of next year. So it's also a strategical, very important question to discuss it. Then we have on Chapter 1, I have also 3 messages or 4. Sustainable development and finance for development was from the very beginning also in our discussions under the rubric accelerating the full achievement of the 2030 agenda. So we draw on the SDG political declaration a lot, sometimes in a way that was a bit more flexible, but you will see most of the language is drawing on that one. We need, and also there was the common understanding that we need a surge in financing for sustainable development. The majority of the delegation have said it's important to accelerate the implementation. That was means of implementation, no new commitments. Please, let's focus on the implementation, the means of implementation. In that regard, let me thank again our colleagues from Ireland and Qatar for steering us to a strong political declaration last year, and you will find some of this track of this agreement in our text. The emphasis in Member States' inputs was on financing for development with strong calls for strengthened means of implementation, as I said. There was this question about increasing ODA and, of course, the implementation of the SDG stimulus by the Secretary General. You will see how we landed. It's, of course, open to discussion. We reflected those priorities accordingly in their inputs. We had also the environmental crises as described and pictured as the most pressing threats to people and planet, saying that if we look at sustainable development, the development has also to factor in that more and more we will be challenged by climate change. So the needs, humanitarian but also development needs, will grow and they will also change. So we try to factor that in the text. This is also why we had references to the fossil fuel transition and to the Fund for Averting, Minimizing and Addressing Loss and Damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change. Strong calls were heard from some delegations to have to address all obstacles to achieving sustainable development, including unilateral coercive measures. We thus included in the paragraph the language from 2030 agenda, from Agenda 2030, that urges states to refrain from promulgating and applying any unilateral economic, financial or trade measures not in accordance with international law and the Charter of the United Nations. This is, of course, a formula compromise. It's clear that it's highly disputed. This one is, I think, a starting point also for further discussions with our colleagues. So I have to speak maybe a bit slower in the hope that never Gertz arrives. Chapter 2 on international peace and security recognizes that the world is undergoing a significant transition. You have seen in the new agenda for peace that in some instances we have concrete proposals among the member states and also unity and the scope for agreement. In some instances we are just digesting, swallowing what has been changing since maybe the last 10 years or 20 years. So we tried to reflect in the text that to affirm that in the face of these threats, international cooperation remains indispensable and that United Nations remains fundamental to achieving collective security. There was some degree of consensus around the challenges the UN faces in fulfilling its purpose. The chapter thus makes a commitment to enhance and make fuller use of the toolbox of the Charter to prevent and mediate conflicts. It was important for many member states to have the mediation in there. It's, of course, in a very kind of broad understanding in the text. The question is, has somebody, different ideas to make it more action-orientated? For us, it was very important to reflect the wish of the membership to address root causes and enablers of all forms of violence, and to have it in this text that is called then Pact for the Future. Across member states' inputs, there was strong emphasis, as I said, on mediation, prevention, peace building, the role of peace operations and peace enforcement, counter-terrorism, disarmament and non-proliferation, and threats emerging from new technologies and in new domains. The order of those issues, and this is why it was important to deliver you and have the service of the brackets, of the bracketed subtitles, which we don't negotiate. But it's important also for you, to see how they are sequenced. There might be different options to do this. I think for us, it was from the input side, that was the more logical one, to have it in the prevention and to start with prevention and then to have disarmament. It could be done otherwise, but then we lose a lot of natural bridge building between the issues. We structured the chapter around these priorities, and we all know that they are interconnected. When we had a chance to write that in the text, we did it. But we admit that this is a long chapter because of the breadth of priorities that member states came up with during these discussions in summer that mirrored mostly the new agenda for peace presented by the Secretary General. But we were of the opinion it's not a good sign to have a pact for the future where we delete everything the member states are delivering because we know it's difficult to come to agreement or to consensus to. This is longer than it should be, but I think if we need the breadth, or we need the kind of longer and we need it all in, so be it. This is what we thought also. We didn't want to, there will probably still be things delegations want to raise and don't see in the text. In this chapter, we made sure that we had several aspects of the new agenda for peace to also reflect most recent developments, such as the updated financing modality for the Peace Building Fund and the strengthening of African Union-led peacekeeping missions. And we can continue this during the weeks. We also decided to include upfront important themes that come up, like interlinkages between peace, development and human rights, and the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, and the Youth, Peace and Security Agenda. And in addition, the introductory section also comprises some brief but important language on humanitarian issues. Look at the situation that we have in the Middle East. I would like now to hand over to my co-facilitator, but he's still there, so not there. So I try to be not too quick. Just give me signals. 3, science, technology and innovation and digital cooperation guided by your vision of harnessing the potential of science, technology and innovation and digital cooperation for the benefit of all humanity. Of course, given that issues related to digital cooperation and artificial intelligence will be dealt with in the Global Digital Compact, we may have left out something you want to see here, also referring to the science, technology and innovation. But I think the most clear-cut or important issues we were able to take up in the text. From inputs received on Chapter 3, there was broad agreement on the importance, of course, of those issues for accelerating the implementation of the SDGs, including the STI's potential with regard to health, food security, and addressing climate change. So we tried to frame it like that, and the need for closing STI gaps, and to this end, scaling up means of implementation for STI, especially in developing countries, are taken on board. Similar to the chapter 3, we have chapter 4. It's relatively shorter compared to some of the other chapters, but again, this is owed to the fact that the topic of future generations will be dealt with in a separate process. And responding to member states' written submissions and statements made during the consultations, the scope of this chapter was widened to encompass not only issues related to youth participation, but also socio-economic aspects, including education, decent work and quality employment, and physical and mental health, including sexual and reproductive health. The chapter also includes action-oriented language on the active, meaningful, and inclusive participation of youth in decision-making, both at the United Nations at the national level. So now I think there will be an engaged discussion between member states on that issue. We had strong calls from the majority of the membership to make reference to the rights and the protection of children. So chapter 4 is somehow also acknowledging, of course, as a group, children as a group distinct from youth and future generations. And also from the final chapter on transforming global governance, the 5, some additional words. We had there the task to respond to the calls made by the large majority of you that we needed to ensure the multilateral system is better equipped to tackle the challenges and seize the opportunities of today and tomorrow. The chapter includes language on the reform of the principal organs, the strengthening of the Peacebuilding Commission, mechanisms to address complex global shocks, and the governance of outer space. And the most important, I think, for everybody was recognizing that the IFA reform was a top priority, and this chapter contains substantive detail on this issue, including on governance reforms at the international financial institutions and multilateral development banks, debt, special drawing rights, and international tax cooperation. We also included language on the strengthening of the UN human rights mechanisms and the revitalization of the Commission on the Status of Women. Another issue that featured in your inputs and was subsequently included in Zero Draft was the selection process of the Secretary General and other senior officials. It's only kind of half a sentence, but it's important, to speak about, do we want to have it in the pact or not, and then if we want to have it, in what way. We have included language on identifying and addressing global shocks and developing a framework on measures of progress on sustainable development to complement GDP. That we had a policy brief on. And maybe now, last but not least, we have heard you, of course, loud and clear. The Security Council reform has to be a priority for the Summit of the Future. But we were also reminded, as laid out in the scope decision, to not duplicate ongoing processes. We had a discussion in the decision negotiations on that issue a long time, and also it was controversial. You therefore find a note in the text under this issue indicating our intention to present initial language on the reform of the Security Council in June 2024. At that time, the IGN will either have presented us with an agreed proposal, or we will receive a chair's text that we can use as the base of further discussions. In any way, it will, if we present language now, it would bind their hands, and I think we rely on this mandated process to deliver, and in that regard, we will continue to coordinate closely with our esteemed colleagues, the IGN co-chairs, Ambassador Marschik of Austria and Ambassador Albanai of Kuwait. I think in June we're also having gone through all the other texts, and I think we have then a new opportunity to deal with this issue that is for many of the member states and groups. We see it from the inputs is a priority issue. This was a challenging text to pull together, and given the breadth of the issues it covers and the divergence of the views. On some key issues, we have done our utmost to present you with a balanced and substantive text that can provide a solid basis for the upcoming process. Thank you for being constructive so far. We hope, of course, that you are not too disappointed. A certain disappointment will come because not everything could be factored in. And we look forward to your continued active engagement on the issues. At this point, we open the floor